Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. I'm still on my makeshift setup. It's still audio only over on YouTube, although we'll put up pictures when they are appropriate. And
Felix.
there,
No.
Tom's dealing with his dog, and very,
Okay, go
very,
ahead.
very little progress on my apartment in the past week, as sadly I have come to expect at this point. So not really too much in the way of updates there. They definitely did some more work in the den ceiling on the plumbing, so they must have found additional problems. That seems to be what was taken care of last week, and I think they deodorized the place because when I visited, I was like, oh, the smell's all gone. Hooray! Finally smells like neutral, non-smelly smell. So
Just air it out.
something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Over here at my parents' place, we've all caught a cold. There's a cold going around. It's not COVID. It's definitely just a cold. It's not that bad, but if I'm a little congested, if I have to suddenly mute my microphone and there's like thumps on my mic or whatever, it's because I'm coughing and I don't want you all to have to hear that. So that's what might be going on there, and my voice
He's
might
got
be a
the
little
Rona.
I just literally said it's not that.
He's got it. You're gonna get the virtual Rona from listening to this podcast.
If you could catch it through this analog to digital connection and all the compression and everything, then that is a virus that deserves to live.
The compression makes it worse.
I guess so.
It gets the virus closer together digitally. The reason I fussed at my dog for a second there is because I had a power cord lying on top of one of his bones, and he was going for the bone, so I had to move the power cord, and now he's got the bone. So if you hear the telltale sign of something getting chewed on by a very large dog, that's what you're hearing. You're hearing
all right.
Felix, who now has just decided he's going to sleep on top of that.
It's going to be an episode like that. There's going to be extraneous noises. Tuck in, strap yourself in now. That's what you're in for.
Right. All right. What did you watch this week or listen to? I suppose. I guess that's always an option.
I suppose it is. We don't usually talk about that, but yeah, Thor: Love and Thunder came out on Disney
How'd
Plus.
you like it?
I watched it in the IMAX enhanced version, but on my parents' 55-inch television with their pair of SVS Prime. What are they called? Prime wireless speakers. First generation, because that's what they've got. So it's not exactly up to the technical standards of my typical home theater, but it was certainly fine for watching on an evening. I enjoyed it. It was amusing. It was fun. It didn't seem particularly consequential, even though like yet another new character coming in to replace an original character. That's seems to be what this whole entire phase is about. Let's introduce the new, younger versions of the characters to replace.
Young Avengers, here we come.
Definitely aiming towards that. So I guess it was significant in that point. I enjoyed Christian Bale as the villain very much. I didn't.
Oh, that's right. I did know that. Sorry.
I do think that he brought something to the role that was not necessarily just there on the page. So he certainly enhanced that. Taika Waititi was back writing and directing, and really just leaned into the irreverent comedy. So it was enjoyable. And for all the people who are like, okay, this one's not as good as the last Thor movie, I agree. And I didn't see a lot of people saying exactly why. And I can put my finger on exactly why this movie isn't as good as Thor Ragnarok. No Loki. That's the problem with this movie. A Thor movie with no Loki, not as good of a Thor movie. So that's my.
He's
take.
busy. He's filming his own.
He definitely
well,
is.
First of all, I think he's dead in this one, right? He's He's a variant. So
the one in the Disney Plus series is a variant. So yes, this Thor's Loki is dead. Yeah,
that's right. And I think he's in a different timeline right now. Anyways, so who knows what's going on?
That's right.
I did not watch Thor: Love and Thunder. We had a very busy weekend with a birthday party, and we had a little bit of a dinner party here. It was just another couple came over, where I got to show off my home theater and realize I hadn't really recalibrated the projector since I got the new
gray
bulb.
Walls in Tom's
well,
theater.
not for the gray walls. Who gives a crap about that? But the black levels were not quite as they were off, and I was disappointed. But I usually don't notice it because Yeah, I didn't really even notice it until we turned on Dune to watch the ornithopter scene. I was like, yeah, that should be, this black level's not right. But what are you gonna do?
Things looking a little washed out.
I finally saw the full first episode of Lord of the Rings. My wife immediately gave up on it, and it's just me and my 13-year-old son watching it now.
Once again, this is The Rings of Power, the
that's
new
right.
Amazon Prime video series.
You know, it is a lot of introducing new characters.
Okay.
You know, and so I think 3 or 4 different storylines that are going on at the same time. So it was a little hard to follow, which, you know, to give my wife a little bit of grace here. Yes, I understand why she was not engaged. But I think it's got some amazing special effects. I mean, it just looks great. So I was really, really liking that.
I heard some people complaining because I believe is that one the one that's filmed on the volume, or is it the new House of the Dragon that's filmed on the volume? I think it's House of the Dragon, come to think of it now, because that's HBO and that's Warner Brothers, and they've got their version of the volume. So okay, I think I was misremembering which of the new fantasy series it is that's filmed on the volume.
I think it looks good, and the actor who's playing Galadriel is phenomenal.
Oh, good.
I mean, she's really, really good.
Great.
And I thought there was some really good acting in it, just overall. So I'm happy with that. Watched Morbius 1.5 times, because the first time for the first time in a long time I had a couple of cocktails, and I cannot have a couple cocktails anymore because I immediately get annihilated. So
where is
I got
Morbius
halfway through the movie
streaming?
and I just turned it off. So it's on Netflix.
Okay.
If you ever tried to write a movie by taking lines from other movies then slightly modifying them so that your main character could say them, that is the dialogue in Morbius. I think that this was a real wasted opportunity here. First of all, I think the special effects, for the most part in this, I mean, there was a couple of moments here and there with the CGI that I thought, ooh, that one wasn't so clean, but were really, really good, especially the way he like flies around and stuff like that. I thought looked just great. And the whole morphing people's faces, like if you all remember The Mummy, which we all love The Mummy, Brendan Fraser, all that, we love The Mummy, right? But anybody who says the special effects for the faces was great is a dang liar, okay? It always looked bad. It never looked realistic. It looked terrible. But they're morphing his face left and right on this thing. And I thought it looked, for the most part, really good. And all of you people who loved Black Panther, and I think Black Panther's a perfectly fine movie. I don't think it deserved all the accolades it got, but it's what it is. It's a perfectly serviceable Marvel movie. The scene where they fall down and they fight on the way down is some of the worst CGI that Marvel has.
Some of the VFX houses, well after the fact now, have come out to explain a little bit about why it was like that, and it's exactly what you think. Changes late in the process led to a super duper time crunch where they're just not able to make it look as good as they want to,
right?
Given
and
the assets that they're starting with.
And I'm not saying that anybody like in particular like blew it. I whenever I see something like that, I'm like, well, somebody must have run out of time or something.
Thor: Love and Thunder has several ropey moments where it's like, well, like we all understand at some point the actors are changed to full CGI these days, right? It's just a full CGI version of Thor or Jane Foster or whomever, and it's like, well, that didn't have enough time to make that transition.
But I thought that they did really, for the most part, with the flying through the air fight scenes and stuff like that, I thought looked really, really good. And if I was an actor or a director or a producer and somebody said, I would like to hire Jared Leto to be the main an actor in our movie, it would give me pause, because every story I've heard about that man is just nightmarish and how you have to deal with him. But I just thought he was fantastic in this movie. I thought he was really good. I know it's so, but I thought he was really good. Now, some of the lines are hard to say. The characters are, I don't even know if you could call them one-dimensional. Like they don't even have a dimension. They're just a mouthpiece for things to happen and then also to die. You know,
they are a speech bubble.
Yeah, it's not a very good movie. Honestly, it's not, and I really feel like it could have been, because there's a lot in there that could have really come about to turn that into. And I mean, he's an interesting character. There's I don't think they particularly sold the story all that well, but that you know, that I think the character is interesting, and they could have really done something with it. It could have been like, he's very close to being like Batman, like actual Batman, not
more like Man Bat.
Yeah, or close to Darkman, actually. If you think about that old Liam, what's his name, Neeson, movie, Darkman. So, anyways, it's not very long. It's got like 5 or 4 or 3 after scene things, which are kind of lame, but it's still worth watching.
Did they tie it to Spider-Man directly at all, or
they did? They did. They did it. They did, I think, twice in the after things. So yes, and the Daily Bugle is the paper everybody's reading, even though that's not a paper anymore. I think it's just
not in the most Marvel universe. So I guess
it's a podcast or something. It's an Alex Jones-esque podcast thing.
Yeah, now it's so. I guess this is yet another multiverse. Is this taking place in the same part of the multiverse as Venom?
Yes,
it would have to be, right?
He said at one point, he says, like, he transforms his face and says, "I'm Venom," or whatever,
gotcha.
Which I think it comes directly from that. And then, I guess, spoiler alert for those of you who give a crap, because believe me, this is never going to play out anywhere.
Right.
Michael Keaton shows up, gets like teleported into this into this universe.
Now he is from the MCU, so
and he is from the MCU, so that's whatever. Listen. It's not a very good movie. I mean,
it's Michael Keaton, so let's just throw it all together with the DC universe too, since he was supposed to show
Michael
up
Keaton
as
was
89
like, you know
Batman
what?
everywhere.
I needed a boat anyways.
That's right.
Or I was going to redo my kitchen.
I don't think Michael Keaton cares if any of the movies that he's already filmed for actually see the light of day under this new HBO management or not.
No.
I kind of doubt he was taking points on the back end, so I'm sure he got paid up front. And
at some point, are we just going to admit that seeing Sony at the beginning of a action movie is just... It just means it's going to be garbage? Is that going to be the thing?
I guess we kind of got to go back to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, at least the first 2 of them, before...
And it literally is right after they're like, oh, these things can make money. Mm-hmm. We better take more control over them, and immediately ruined every single one of them. It is just, and the number of times Morbius says a line that you're like, oh, that's an MCU line, and you just stole it from somebody else and changed it.
And yet,
I'll give you an example. And this is, believe me, you're not going to be like, oh, I can't believe you spoiled that for me. He says, I'm getting hungry. You wouldn't like me when I'm hungry. And I almost kicked my own projection screen. I was so mad at that.
That's pretty bad. And yet he never says it's Morbin time, which is all anybody actually wanted.
It's Morbin time. But and then the guy who and it was, I mean, obviously telegraphed, but the old Doctor Who guy, what's his name? Matt something, right? Is that right?
Oh, yeah. There was a Matt. I'm forgetting his last name.
Anyways, he's like, if anybody was ever had the face to be a zombie or a vampire, it is this man. Like, he has got pronounced brow, pronounced chin. It's just he doesn't need much makeup to be turned into like an undead creature. So he was like built for it, and it was kind of fun to see him try to chew the sceneries with some of the worst lines you could possibly ever ask
Matt
for.
Smith, by the way. Very difficult name.
Yeah, I know, really. How could I forget? And you could almost see, too, if you're at all familiar with storytelling or have ever seen a movie, where they cut it, where you're like, there was certainly something important here that they cut out for time or because they couldn't do. There were things that should have been said, and then the very end of the movie, like the big fight scene culmination here is like, and now I have this power. You're like,
excellent.
What? Where did that come from? Like, there was no indication in any part of the movie that you could do this.
Deus Ex
and now
superpower.
You can do it, and that's how you win. You win because you can do this thing that we have no idea you could have done. Like, no foreshadowing whatsoever.
There you go.
You're going to say that there's a little bit. There's not. There's not.
It was
There's
a
no
surprise,
foreshadowing.
Tom. It was
It's
a surprise.
I would have been surprised. I at least have the character say, I didn't even know I could do that at the end. At least do that so that we could all be on the same page with the WTF of the end of this stupid movie.
If you're writing anything, do not put that line in your book or movie or anything. If your character at the end of everything says, I didn't know I could do that, that is not good writing.
Nope. That is, but at
you.
least try to explain it. You know what I mean? At least try to explain it. But this was, so anyways, pretty good special effects, I thought. There was some good use of sound. Like I said, I thought that Jared Leto did a good job. And for the most part, everybody who was in there tried to do the best they could with what they had to work with.
Well, maybe I'll check it out. You'll check out Thor Love and Thunder, and both of us will go in with low expectations and be entertained. Because that's the type of movies that they are.
Well, I think if I can, for my wife at least, if it's at least funny,
right?
She can, in a little bit more character driven, I think we'll have a better time. All right. So AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website, avrant.com, to find our older episodes, including show notes with our Flickr albums that you can use to follow along with the pictures that we will be talking about. You can go to facebook.com/avrantpodcast. You can go to youtube.com/avrant, where you can hear the podcast and see the images up on the screen.
And I mean, for all the previous episodes, there was our faces to look at in any event.
I don't know that we ever have to go back to the faces. I think we could just do the logo and then do. I really do think that just do the logo. It's an audio
our
podcast.
views are down, Tom. Our views are down from where they were typically. So I guess there
they
are
went
people
from
who
like
want to see our
100
faces.
to 90, 99. I mean,
they went from like 850 to 650 or something like that. Because we've been around for 15 years, and that's the type of views we get on YouTube.
Woohoo! Yeah, we were wondering why we haven't retired and doing this full time. Just look at those views.
Indeed.
And ask yourself that. Contact Rob directly. Rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom@avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. I want to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week. You can go to avrant.com. Click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. And leave us a PayPal donation through the PayPal site. We want to thank Herb for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Herb. I'm guessing that's Cross Spectrum Labs, Herb?
That is Herb from Cross Spectrum Labs, yes. He kindly wrote in and also made that PayPal donation, so very much appreciated, Herb. That was very nice of him. He heard about all the troubles with my apartment, so he's like, catching up a little bit on a little backlog of podcasts, and so wrote in now. Thank you, Herb.
Thank you, Herb. And you do realize it's all your fault we're doing this Thursday thing, right?
It is. That's not even a lie or an exaggeration. It was
he was the one that suggested
due to his request.
He asked for it to be on Thursday, and now it's on Thursday.
Well, he asked for it to be any day earlier than Friday. So we're like, well, Thursday's the best we can do. But that is earlier than Friday.
Well, yeah, and I can understand that because, like, my kids, like, everything's scheduled on Monday.
That's right.
Like, all the practices, everything is scheduled on Monday.
And all the podcasts come out on Friday, which is true.
I understand. Let's see here. We want to thank 138 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon is a service where you can sign up to become a monthly subscriber to our podcast, where every month you give some amount of money to them, and they give most of it to us. I think the minimum is $1.
It is.
So $12 a year.
Yep.
To support this podcast doesn't seem like a huge ask. It's a
pretty good deal.
Barely a fancy coffee these days.
Yeah, that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thank you to our 138 patrons over there.
If you can't support us financially, find some way to support us, and we will mention you here. So Nathan sent a Canadian movie code to Rob for Rob to use of A Clockwork Orange.
Yes, indeed. I did redeem that. I'm starting to build a little catalog over on Google Play, because that's where these things redeem in Canada. They give you no options.
There you go. You have anything, you can redeem it anywhere you want, as long as it's Google Play.
That's right. Thank you, Nathan.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Greg, who's what do we call these people?
2 hour plus
2
club
hour
member?
plus.
He said the secret words.
That's right, 2 hour plus plus. So he's the second round.
2 hour plus max.
We may plus lowercase case I plus max.
That's it.
All right. As we might recall, some of Greg's past emails in which he asked long questions about repairing things after water damage. So he can sympathize with what Rob's going through now and what Tom went through a while back, and not a lot of fun. You are right.
We all are in agreement. Not a lot of fun.
Julian says he's impressed that we were managing to continue the podcast while Rob is staying with his parents. I mean, I did it from an Airbnb and all kinds of other places, but whatever. He can sympathize, having temporarily moved back to his parents' place for a while following his ankle surgery a few years back. He was very grateful, but also very ready to be back in his own place once he was well enough. Living with your parents again as an adult, even temporarily, can have its challenges. And then I will again remind people that I had my parents living with us for like 3.5 months while they were trying to get their place renovated before they. And that challenging is a very nice way of saying that.
I mean, I'm happy to report that for me, living with my parents is really not. I definitely wouldn't use the word challenging. I will be happy to be back in my own place. I would definitely prefer to be living on my own in the apartment that I own, but I would not describe this as challenging. We are coexisting very, very easily at my parents' place, so that is I'm exceedingly grateful for. That makes this whole thing much, much easier.
I also got notes of thanks from JT, from Bret, who is a 2 Hour Plus Club and Plus Plus Club member.
That's right.
Ryan, Eric, and Herb, who's, of course, from Cross Spectrum Labs, and he very kindly offered to replace Rob's individually calibrated UMic 1 if it was damaged by the apartment flood. Thankfully, it was not. Gurinder has taken down the archway that his friend built as the entrance into what is now Gurinder's home theater in his basement. His friend must have built that thing to withstand an earthquake, but now he'll be able to close off that theater room. 2x4s are still so expensive. Here's to hoping Rob's apartment is put back together by Canadian Thanksgiving.
I am not holding out any hope for that. I'm hoping at this point maybe by Remembrance Day.
I don't know when either of those two things occur, but I will take your word for it. So there we go.
We can just say American Thanksgiving. That'll be closer to when I'm thinking this will actually be done.
All right, so these notes of gratitude we got from Greg, Julian, JT, Bret, Ryan, Eric, Herb, and Gurinder. So thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. I'll just run through the names one more time. Greg, Julian, JT, Bret, Ryan, Eric, Herb, Gurinder. Thank you all so much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us, for keeping the podcast going, such as it is, in whatever form it takes for the time being. And it's going to be for a while yet, but stick with us. Thank you very much to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
In the news this week, hot on the heels of last week's Denon and Marantz 2022 receiver and separates rumors and leaks. The flagship 15.4 channel Denon AV receiver has now been added to the list of leaked models. It will supposedly be called the AVR-A1H or A1H 8K with a price of $6,500. It supposedly has 15 channels of amplification built in, and a leaked image of the back panel shows binding posts for 17 speakers, suggesting it has similar capabilities to switch between different speaker configurations. For, say, Oro 3D's speaker layout versus Atmos. Just why? And that'll be like the outgoing X8500H. So this is the A1. So this is starting to sound more like a Yamaha, but whatever. Yeah, I don't love it, but whatever.
I mean, we would definitely anticipate that if Marantz has a pre-pro that can do 15.4, then Denon would have a sister model AV receiver that can do 15.4. I'm a little surprised if it really does have 15 amplifier channels all built in. I'm thinking at this point, wouldn't they have to switch to Class D to make that work whatsoever?
They would have to.
Given that they've got this 16 channel, supposedly Marantz separate amplifier that is now Class D, it makes me think that maybe that'll be what's in here, but we don't have any details on that. All of this is rumor at this point, none of it confirmed for real, so take everything with a grain of salt, but most of this information seems to be fairly accepted at this point as there being something here. There's a whole lot of smoke, so figuring that there must be some fire to the information. And I wouldn't say any of this is like dramatically shocking, but so far still no replacements for the 13 channel models like the X6700H and the Marantz SR8015. No word on replacements for those yet. Maybe they're just going to skip right from 11 to 15. That could be what they're doing. But there we go. That rounds out the line.
Some XLR outputs for, is that for balanced pre-out?
I think they're for subwoofers. I think
they're labeled subwoofers. I don't know about that. That looks
well, it could be because they're supposed to be doing this 4 independent subwoofer things so that you can add on optionally Dirac Live bass management and have true independent 4 subwoofer outputs. So
there's a couple of XLR inputs too for analog audio. So
yeah, stereo analog XLR inputs. That was on the previous model, so that wouldn't be shocking at all.
You can't see me because we don't have the thing, but if you could see me, you would see me squinting. I'm going to the eye doctor today. I'm gonna need glasses. It's
reading glasses. Yeah,
absolutely clear to me that this is what's going on. All right, TCL looks to continue its dominance of the high-performance, low-price TV market with the release of their newest 6 Series TVs, the R655 series. Mm-hmm. They've returned to using Roku as the operating system, and they've managed to keep MSRPs the same as last year, $700 for the 55, $1,000 for the 65, and $1,500 for the 75. But they've upped the specs in a few areas. The 75-inch now has 360 zones of local dimming, up from 240 last year. And still using mini LED backlights with quantum dots, they've increased the panel's refresh rate to 144 Hz for PC gamers, and 2 HDMI 2.1 ports and 2 HDMI 2.0 ports. Variable refresh rate and every flavor of HDR are on board, and of course they're saying these are the brightest 6 Series TVs yet. Because nothing ever goes down in performance.
Definitely not. I mean, hey, if it's got more mini LEDs and more zones of local dimming, then it would make sense that it also got a little bit brighter. But no, I remain excited about these. It's not as though there was like huge dramatic technological changes or something like that. But these still represent, in my opinion, probably the best value out there. If you're like, I basically want flagship LCD performance, but at half the price. TCL 6 Series has been up there. Last year we weren't as bullish on them because they experimented with changing over to Android TV and had a whole bunch of bugs and problems. They even had a stop on sales at one point. It got so bad. So they've returned to Roku. That's probably a good idea. That's been stable and working well for them for a long time. And but as far as the actual LCD panels and the backlighting and stuff, they've been shockingly good performers for a long time now. And I think those prices are pretty darn reasonable.
Okay. This year brought the first quantum dot OLED TVs from Samsung and Sony, but only at 55 and 65-inch screen size. That's set to change next year, as Samsung Display has shown off their first 77-inch QD-OLED panels expected to be used in new models from Samsung and Sony next year. So,
I'm kind of excited about that. If I do end up getting replacement money from my insurance company for the OLED that was damaged, I might just wait. I might just wait for a 77-inch quantum dot OLED because, why not be right at the cutting edge?
There you go. Nothing is ever bad with somebody being an early adopter, Rob. It's always worked out for them.
At least it'll be second gen. It'll be the first gen of the 77-inch size, but it'll be the second gen of the quantum dot OLED panels themselves.
Sonos has released their long-rumored Sub Mini for $430. It uses the same dual 6-inch driver configuration as the larger $750 Sub Gen 3.
And that's the name. If you look it up, it's Sub Gen 3, but that's $750. This is the Sub Mini for $430.
But it's now in a smaller cylindrical cabinet, 1 foot tall, 9 inches in diameter, with less amplifier power. The two drivers face each other with a slot opening in the middle of the sub between them, unlike the Sub Gen 3, which allowed for dual subwoofers to be used. Only a single Sub Mini can be paired, and while it will work with any Sonos speaker except their outdoor portable models, they strongly recommend only using it in small rooms or at low volume levels. If you stick it in a large room, specs say the frequency response goes as low as 25 hertz. Which means...
that is quite literally what it says on the webpage. No minus decibel numbers attached to that.
No.
This is not a big low playing sub. It is just to, go with your Sonos Beam and get you down to 45 hertz. I'm kind of guessing is probably where this thing actually goes.
I went to I said I went to a dinner party this weekend, and it was a birthday party for a friend. Lives down the street, and they had just gotten a Sonos, and It's a portable, one of the portable speakers that looks like a, I don't know, it looks like a barrel. I mean, it's kind of ugly, to be honest with you. But they're really happy with it, so whatever, I don't care. All right, some questions here. Kiran in India, he says, or they say, what's our take on DSP and subwoofers? Kiran saw a recent YouTube video with the owner of a company that makes subwoofers. He explained why their particular subwoofers do not use DSP, and let me tell you why they don't before I even read any more. Because it's hard to do right and expensive. But they're going to give you a bunch.
Using like off-the-shelf amplifiers would be another potential reason.
There's a lot of reasons, and none of them have to do with anything this person's about to say. And there's quite a backlash in the comments and from other YouTubers. The subwoofers that Kiran owns and uses do not have DSP, but he uses them with Odyssey, so he's never missed the subwoofers not having any manual EQ of their own, but he's never noticed any sorts of problems that would seem to make DSP built into his subwoofers necessary. Doesn't including DSP increase the cost? Yes. If we really only need to set up our subs correctly one time and then basically never touch them again, why are some people so adamant that DSP in subwoofers is important? Because it isn't solely about the ability for users to make their own adjustments. Because I don't ever, and have never, and will never, in my lifetime that I can imagine, do that. I will never go into my subwoofers user menus, or on the back there where they sometimes have knobs, or in SVS's case their app, and make changes to the subwoofer performance. But
so just to be very clear, we should define for everybody, DSP just stands for digital signal processing. That's what the DSP stands for.
Right. Or EQ.
Well, I mean, I think from just the wording that Kiran used, that he's thinking of the built-in equalization or built-in filtering options, but as Tom just mentioned, that isn't the only thing that digital signal processing is necessarily used for, to give you EQ filters or other types of filters that you can manually adjust. That's not the only purpose of it. So if we're thinking of any subwoofer, we want it to have some type of protection on that driver, so that driver isn't going to bottom itself out if you send it a crazy high signal level. And we want to make sure that distortion levels are kept to somewhat reasonable, so that we're not hearing horrible distortion from the driver or port chuffing from the port if it has one, that type of thing. And there are multiple ways of implementing protection in that way. Most of the amplifiers that you're going to see on subwoofers are going to be Class D, and sometimes they just have a very simple rumble filter that's built right into them, which technically would be a form of DSP. It's just not a form of DSP that the user is able to make any adjustments to, but that's very often just baked right into a lot of Class D amplifiers that are used in subwoofers. Or in the case of something like Rhythmic, they use a servo system. Servo system is not digital. It's not digital signal processing, but it's a form of signal processing in there to produce a feedback loop that allows them to control that driver, not have it bottom out, at least not very easily, and not have it produce a bunch of distortion, at least not very easily. So DSP, digital signal processing, is just another method that you might potentially use to exert control over the driver. Make sure it doesn't bottom out, make sure it doesn't distort. So, Monoprice with their Monolith series, SVS with their subwoofers, they have chosen to use DSP as their method of protecting the drivers. Now, if you look at the feature differences, SVS gives you a whole bunch of EQ filters and other types of filters that you can adjust inside of their app, but the Monoprice Monolith subwoofers really don't. They just have the standard controls for volume and for your crossover setting. And that's about it. They don't have a bunch of EQ settings for you to adjust. But both of them do use digital signal processing to protect the driver. And then SVS also gives you additional features on top of it. So it is certainly not a necessity. It's not a necessity to have DSP, but it can be a very cost-effective way of protecting the driver or adding those extra features. Does it add some cost? Of course, versus it not being there whatsoever, but not necessarily a tremendous amount of cost. It's not the type of thing where it's automatically going to make your subwoofer thousands of dollars versus it could have been only hundreds, if not for the DSP. It's not that type of difference that's going in there. So, you can look at HSU subs. They just use bash amplifiers. They don't have manual adjustments other than the regular knobs that you would expect. They, don't have the EQ adjustments or something like that. But in terms of protecting it, they just have the basic sort of bash amplifier rumble filter at the very bottom of them, like I talked about. So, yeah, I think that's about it. It's not inherently good or bad. I think it is a method of achieving a goal, and it can be an extremely effective method of achieving that goal. Yeah.
Leighton. Leighton has been using his 50-inch Pioneer Curo plasma TV for many, many years now. He's adored it, but sadly it seems to be dying. And it's developed a black line running across the screen that won't go away. Back when he bought it, no other TV could touch the black levels and overall picture quality, and frankly, that seemed to remain true for many years. If there was one downside, it was that it generated quite a lot of heat during use, which is not uncommon for plasmas. So his room is small, but he sits just about 10 feet from eyes to screen. I'd like to go up in size now, perhaps over 80 inches. And we'd like something comparable in terms of black levels and picture quality. And if this new TV could throw off less heat, that would be great. Well, believe me, any TV you're going to buy today is going to throw up less heat than this thing.
Yeah,
Plasmas were like you could cook on them. The things were so.
I mean, unless you go crazy and go for a micro LED modular display, those throw off even more heat than plasmas used to.
Yeah.
But I don't quite think that's what he's going for.
That's not at 10 feet. So why don't you suggest all the OLEDs, and I'm going to get more coffee.
Alrighty, so yes, OLED is pretty much the only way that I think you should go. You got a plethora of choices here because didn't really say exactly what your maximum budget is. So I mean, I'll start at what I would sort of consider the top. If you want to just get the very best OLED that is available out there right now, I'm going to say that's LG's G2 OLED. That's their flagship 4K OLED. It has the design that is the exact same thickness throughout the entire panel, which is very, very thin, less than an inch, and sits completely flush on the wall. Do have to warn you, the G2s do not come with any sort of stand in the box. They are really meant to be wall mounted. You can pay an additional like $100 to get a stand for it, optionally if you want to, but they really are meant to hang on the wall. But they've got a heatsink on the back there. They've got the very latest, newest OLED.EX panels from LG Display. They are the brightest OLEDs that are out there, and really just the very top of the line that LG makes. So they have that in 83-inch size. If you do want to go above 80 inches, that is $6,000 though right now for the 83-inch G2. Should keep in mind though, they have the 77-inch size below that, which is $3,800. So I mean, that's a huge difference in price. That's a $2,200 difference in price to go from the 83-inch down to 70-inch. And if you were like, I'm toying with the idea of going above 80, honestly, 77 is pretty close. So maybe that G2 is within reach, but at the 77-inch size. So looking at what would be the less expensive options if you do want that 83-inch size, but you don't want to quite get all the way to $6,000, well, LG's C2, of course, is their most popular series, and the 83-inch size there is $5,000, $1,000 less expensive. The 77-inch version of that is available for $3,000, so $800 less expensive than the G2 if you're going to 77-inch size. There's the alternative, though, of going over to Sony's A90J series, which is actually a holdover from 2021. It is also $5,000 for the 83-inch size. The reason I mention that is it has a heatsink. The C2 series does not have a heatsink. The G2 series does. The A90J series from Sony from last year, it has a heatsink. So if that's something that you think you would like to have built into your OLED, that is available for $5,000, 83-inch size, Sony's A90J. If you go down to the 77-inch size in Sony's lineup, they don't have a 77-inch in the A90J series. You'd be coming to this A80K series to get the 77-inch size at $3,000, exactly the same as LG's C2. Honestly, though, LG's C2 kind of outperforms the A80K, so price for price, there's not much reason to not go with the C2 if you want $3,000 for 77 inches. And then, if you just want that 83-inch size at the lowest price you can still find C1 LGs from 2021, and they're going for $4,000 these days for the 83-inch size. So that is probably the one I'm going to point you to most strongly. There wasn't a huge difference going from the C1 series to the C2 series. There were a small little refinements. If the money doesn't matter to you, maybe you'll enjoy them, but they are small little refinements year over year. So $4,000 for an 83-inch C1 OLED is a pretty great deal. If you're just like, look, all of those prices, including $3,000, is just more than I wanted to spend, or I want to really get that above 80-inch size, but for under $4,000, that's where I would come to Samsung's QLED, particularly the Q90A from last year, because you can still find some of the 85-inch Q90A QLEDs from Samsung going for $2,600. So that's a lot of screen size. Very good performance. It's about as close as LCD could get to OLED, but OLED still looks better. So if you can afford the OLED and you're coming from plasma, get the OLED. That's my honest recommendation. But if you want the biggest size and under $3,000, go out there and look for a QN90A from Samsung. And I think you'd still be pretty darn happy with that.
I will say a heatsink just helps dissipate the heat into the air, so it doesn't really...
Yep.
It doesn't really if you're worried about the heat coming off of the TV, the heat sink doesn't help you. It just gets the heat out faster.
But it helps get it away from the panel that little bit faster. So if you've got any concerns about image retention or burn-in, now you've been living with a Kuro Plasma all these years. That tells me you know how to avoid burn-in. And OLEDs burn in much less easily than plasmas did. You can leave images up on an OLED much longer than you could have on a plasma before burn-in is any concern on an OLED. So I'm really not worried about that. But if you just want the pinnacle of what OLED can do, having that heatsink on there gets it to the absolute pinnacle of what OLED can do.
Right. Gurinder. So we said just to use polyfill to stuff DIY speaker cabinets, but what if you've been making DIY acoustic panels and you have some rock wool or fiberglass insulation left over? Is it okay to use those types of insulation as speaker cabinet stuffing? Sure.
It sure is. It absolutely is.
It doesn't matter. I mean...
It makes exceedingly little difference.
People don't do it because it's more expensive.
And usually, yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder. It's actually, in this case, a little harder to work with because you want to just shove it in there and have it fill up the space.
Yep.
Not the rock wool, which is like already in a shape and doesn't want to change.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, knock yourself out.
Yeah, I mean, effective-wise, as far as, just damping the little bit of resonance that might be inside the speaker cabinet itself, which is all we're trying to do. We're just trying to break up the inside of the speaker cabinet, not having any sort of little echoes of its own going on there. It's, honestly, I mean, as far as trying to measure it, it seems like a pretty trivial thing, because when people actually try to measure what difference it makes versus literally not having any stuffing whatsoever, it's like, that's a really small difference, but there's a few frequencies where that little bit of difference can be made, right at the resonant frequency of whatever speaker cabinet you're using. There can be a little bit of measured difference. So it's basically any type of fluffy insulation that you can put in there is going to do the job just fine. So if you've got some laying around from other projects, absolutely feel free to use that.
Greg isn't necessarily ready, financially, to pull the trigger on a new set of front speakers just yet, but he aspires to upgrade his current Polk RTI and CSI bookshelf and center fronts to bookshelf and center fronts.
Yeah, the front three. He's got
front three, anyways.
Left, center,
at some point in the not too distant future, and it's just fun to daydream a little. So, his room is small, well treated. And he's packed in quite a few seats, and he like as many of them as possible to receive great sound quality. So he figures that speakers with very even dispersion are probably the way to go, and it led him to putting KEF at the top of his list. But he uses a false wall at the front of his room, so even though he thinks KEF speakers are beautiful, looks aren't really going to matter, and he wonders if a good portion of KEF's prices are going towards their good looks. He's got shelves on his front wall that stick out about 18 inches, hidden behind his acoustically transparent false wall. And the whole front wall is lined with rock wool insulation, and you cannot see the speakers at all. So he went looking for less expensive alternatives to KEF, and you came upon HSU CCB8 concentric speakers, which is exactly what I was going to recommend.
Right.
At 12, I mean, it's the first thing that came to my mind. At $12.90 after shipping for 3 of those, they'd be less expensive than the pair of KEF Q350 bookshelf speakers plus the matching Q650C sensor, which would cost them $1,500 together. And of course, it'd be much less expensive than the KEF LS50 Meta speakers, which would cost only $500. The LS50 Metas would be at the very top of his potential price range. Spending less would be great, but can the HSU CCB8 stack up? Would they even be better than the Q series? He's just interested to hear our thoughts. If the CCB8s were part of KEF's lineup, where would they slot in sound quality wise? And is he paying just for looks that he doesn't need when it comes to KEF?
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer.
That's not an easy question. I don't know where they would slot in this whole thing, because I've personally never heard them. I've never heard the HSUs, the shoes. So I don't know. I think you're asking the wrong question, though. I mean, I think the question you should be asking is, what should I, $2,500 apparently is the top of your budget.
Yeah.
And you would rather spend closer to $1,250 if possible, so half that, if at all possible. So where in that range would be the best bang for buck, getting with the desired speaker characteristic,
right,
which are speakers that have fairly wide dispersion. You can buy 3 of them instead of relying on KEF's weird center speaker instead of just getting 3 matching ones, and fit within the budget and everything else. I think and would be a noticeable upgrade over your Polks, because that's the real question. here.
Yeah.
You've already kind of decided that you want a concentric speaker, and I think that's a mistake. You don't have to have a concentric driver to have a good off-axis response. I'll give you an example. Atlanta Technology back in the day, when Vance Dixon, whatever his name is.
Can't remember if there's an N in there or not. I think it's just Dickinson.
Yeah, it's something like that. When he was designing for them, he used to design speakers with such crazy off-axis response that towing them in at almost any angle made no audible difference whatsoever to them being pointed straight out, which means that you could sit 30 degrees off axis of these things and they sounded exactly the same as them pointed directly at your face.
And they were not concentric or coaxial. That uses Vance Dickinson. I looked it up. It's Dickinson. It's an A, not an I or an IN.
I knew it was something like that. That's why I said it weird.
He had his nested array. That was his whole design thing that resulted in those measurements with the exceedingly even dispersion.
He works for somebody else, or he was designing for somebody else for a while. I thought, I want to say Aperion for a bit, but
Emotiva. He was involved with the Emotivas. Yeah.
So I think that you're over limiting yourself. You've already made some decisions and I think that we should still be asking questions. So,
I mean, just to offer a little bit of flip side to that, like if you went with KEF or if you went with the HSU CCB8s, I wouldn't anticipate you being super disappointed coming from your Polks. We're not saying that, no. But I agree with Tom that limiting yourself only to coaxial or concentric is not a necessity to get what you're going after. I just wanted to mention, sort of directly with what he was asking there, the CCB8 speakers from HSU, they're targeting a bit of a different use case than the KEF Q series or the KEF LS50s, because the CCB8s, sort of their big claim to fame is that they are more efficient. They're a high sensitivity speaker that can play very, very loud with very few watts and also have tremendously high power handling, so they can play crazy, crazy loud. You said you have a small room, lots of seats, but a small room. You really aren't going to need or take advantage of the high sensitivity or the crazy high output capabilities of the CCB8s. You're not really the market that they're really aiming for. Now that said, there's nothing really harmful about having high efficiency speakers even in a small theater. You're going to be able to drive them, with a clock radio and have no problem at all. You are not going to need external amplification in your setup if you went with CCB8s. But like, where would I slot them into KEF's lineup if they happen to be part of KEF's? I wouldn't put them as high as the LS50s. The LS50s are pretty close to like flagship refinement in the sound. I love them. I love the KEF LS50s. I haven't actually even heard the metas yet. I just heard the generation 1 of the LS50s, and I love them a lot. And I wouldn't put the CCB8s directly up against those. If you can afford the LS50s, I know it's right at the top of your budget, but if you can, like, they are a really nice sounding speaker, really refined, really excellent design, and them being a little bit smaller and not inefficient but not super efficient is no problem in your room. In your small room, LS50s are going to perform really, really nicely. So, if you went that way, I wouldn't say there's no justification for doing it. I'm like, yeah, you could get there. You could justify going for LS50s. Like against the Q series, the Q350s, that's really tough. I'm not going to say they sound the same. They've got that sort of different target of just being higher efficiency, higher output. That isn't really the Q series entire bag. Going specifically for those things. I mean, roughly, I'd say it's kind of a lateral move, sound quality wise. I don't think they're worlds apart, but then they're also not worlds apart price wise. $250 difference once you get all three for the front, but they're not worlds apart by any means. So, KEF speakers, I agree, they look nice. They're putting some money into that cabinet, but all speakers, you'll find the cabinet is the most expensive single component in any speaker, is the cabinet. HSU is saving some money by going with a very basic finish. It kind of explains maybe that $250 difference, to be honest, but it's not going to be tremendously than that. It's not like KEF is skimping on all the components inside of their Q series just so they can have a little bit nicer looking cabinet, but like that $250 difference and having you pay extra if you want grills, it's like, yeah, that's all going into the aesthetics over there on KEF. So I think it's about there. That's where I put it to answer the question directly. But like Tom was getting to, and I'll let him get back to it. There certainly are other options, and if you're $1,500 ish for 3 front speakers, there are definitely other options that will still have wide dispersion.
And there's nothing to stop you from going out there and listening to what is available. And you're like, well, I don't know about the dispersion. Just walk. Just don't sit down and listen to the speakers. Like, literally walk around the room, and you will be able to, and get right in front of the speaker like Rob does, and move your head on and off axis as things are playing. And yes, you could do a sweep, but you don't have to be crazy about it like Rob does. So you just put something on there that, even if you're not familiar with it, you should be able to hear changes in tone as you're moving side to side, as long as what is playing is somewhat uniform. So somebody's singing, vocal range is where we're going to be most sensitive anyways. So being able to hear that change in tone as you're moving around should tell you something. And you may find that, hey, I found a speaker that, honestly, I don't think sounds very good on axis, which would describe a lot of horn-loaded speakers. But then off axis, it is pretty uniform, out pretty wide. So this means that you would end up having a speaker that you would face directly straight forward, and then the off axis is where the couch would be for the most part, maybe, or just with that tiniest bit of toe in there. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a situation where I'm going to say you're going to need to go out there and do some listening, because
you also have the option of going with the companies with the free 2-way shipping. There's no reason you couldn't bring in at least just a pair of SVS Prime series, which will definitely be in the sort of price class that you're looking for. Some Aperion Novus series speakers, which will be a little bit towards the higher end of the price point that you're looking at, but still within the sort of budget that you specified. And with free 2-way shipping from both of those companies, there's really no reason not to give that a try. One other aspect of this whole thing that came to mind for me is, you're talking about upgrading the front 3, but in the future, maybe you're going to want to go for not necessarily identical surrounds and surround backs, maybe even overheads, but something that timbre matches really nicely. I did kind of want to warn in that instance, HSU doesn't have any other smaller, more affordable speaker to complement the CCB8s. And their horn-loaded speakers don't have the exact same timbre as the CCB8s do. Even though it's the same brand, they're considerably different designs. So if you're going CCB8s and you end up wanting really perfectly matching surrounds, it's like, that's kind of going to be more CCB8s, and they're big. That's an 8-inch woofer in those things. Those are big honking cabinets. With your 18 inches that you got behind your false wall, I've got no problem with that. But if they're going to end up as surrounds, I'm kind of like, ugh, maybe that's something just to consider for the future. Kef, of course, has other things in their Q series lineup, but if you went with the LS50s, you're going to have to use a different series for your surrounds, or else just use more LS50s, which would be tremendously overpriced surrounds.
Right.
So, those are just things in the back of my mind to keep in mind, that if you are going to be expanding the system and adding surrounds later. So, again, SVS is going to be a very good option there. Hyperion is going to be a good option. Ascend is going to be a good option too. If you look at their signature series, maybe you end up with CMT 340s across the front and then HTM 200 SEs as your surrounds and backs and overheads and that type of thing. And that's going to be well within the price range that you're looking at, and a really, really good value. And they didn't put very much money into the aesthetics of the Ascend signature series. They are very plain black speakers.
Yeah, I really feel like you're overthinking the aesthetic concerns. How much cost.
I think it was just a question in his mind.
Yeah.
Is it like, I think he was like, are the CCB8s actually considerably better sounding than the Kef Q series? The Q series is more expensive just because of the looks, and I wouldn't really say that. I think they're kind of lateral in sound quality overall, but different targets, because the CCB8s are definitely going for more efficient and higher output.
All right. I'm also going to put a link in here for cross-firing speaker toe-in, okay?
Yeah.
Because if you are sitting very close and you have a lot of seats and you're really worried about this making sure everybody has a very uniform
trying to get the widest sweet spot just from your stereo left-right pair.
Yeah, then there's something to look into, and my article on that doesn't just talk about how to position them, but why it works.
Yeah.
So,
and particularly in small rooms, that can be where it benefits you the most. Yeah.
So, Julian figures they are likely to move in the next year or two, and he'd like to make a bunch of DIY absorption panels that he could use right now in his home theater, as well as in their space on the lower floor that seems to turn into an echo chamber if more than a couple of people are talking at the same time. But he'd like these panels to be easy to move, so they won't be a hassle bringing them with him. When they move, he likes the idea of making a bunch of 2x2 and some 2x3 panels. Seems like those would be easiest and also could be arranged into some interesting looking patterns versus the bigger 2 foot by 4 foot rectangles. So if he's making smaller panels, could he just use regular fiberglass batt insulation, just like the standard 3.5-inch thick R13 batt insulation? He asks because at his work, there's always access to leftover batts of unused, unfaced R13 fiberglass, so he can basically get as much as he wants for free. If rock wool or semi-rigid fiberglass performs way better and is worth it, he's willing to buy it. But if regular R13 insulation is okay, so much the better. So it would be okay. The problem is getting it to stay in place,
right?
In your panels. So,
performance-wise, totally fine. So no worries from that. This is strictly a physical matter that we're talking about.
I think your idea of going with 2 by 4 foot panels is good, because this is less insulation to start to sag within your
going
panel.
with smaller than 2 foot by 4 foot, going with 2 foot by 2 foot or 2 foot by 3 foot.
Yeah. That's what I meant. I'm sorry. But yes, I wouldn't even really go 2 foot by 3 foot. But since you have, because at first,
maybe he wants to get some images, and that's the right sort of aspect ratio for images. I could certainly see that being the case.
But since if you were doing the rigid fiberglass, I would say either go 2 by 2 or 2 by 4, not 2 by 3, because then you have a foot left over, and what are you going to do with it? But in your case, because of how you have access to this free insulation, I would just caution you to make sure that you have some way of giving it some sort of structure.
Yeah.
Which could be as easy as putting, we had somebody asking about like screen door material the other day.
Don't need to go that complicated.
But this would be a case where you could use something like that to kind of hold it together. But
you could.
You
could also just like have some little things protruding from around the edges of the frame just to give the insulation a little bit of something to bite onto on its edges, rather than only relying on its inherent lack of stiffness to keep it from sagging inside the panel. Like, it doesn't take much, right? It's not as though 2 feet by 2 feet of fiberglass insulation is going to like sink itself down like a rock. It doesn't work like that. If you give it just a little bit of a tooth to hold on to around the edges, that's kind of all it takes. So that could be quite simple. The only thing I would say here is that just going to use regular fiberglass insulation like this, you're going to want to have something on both the front and the back of the panel. Because very often if we're doing rock wool, like if we're doing DIY with rock wool, we'll just leave the back of the panel completely open because that rock wool isn't going anywhere and we're not worried about it, and it saves a little bit of fabric on the back. I would just say with regular fiberglass insulation, again, structurally, not sound-wise or air quality or safety wise or anything like that, just structurally having a piece of fabric to close in the back of the panel would be a good idea. So I think that's all you need to do, and totally fine to use regular R13 insulation from a performance standpoint.
So he visited his parents on the East Coast recently. We might recall that a little while back he asked us for any ideas as to why HEOS on the Marantz SR7013 receiver stopped working. We suggested fully resetting the HEOS app on their iPhones from within the HEOS app itself, which would then require logging back in and setting everything up again. So he attempted to help them with that, but resetting the HEOS app did not get the Marantz internet radio and HEOS working, and he triple-checked everything he could think of in terms of the Marantz's network connection. He went through Wi-Fi setup several times, ran an Ethernet cable to the receiver, and even did a full factory reset with no dice. He's under the impression that the Marantz was getting an internet connection because they could browse through all the various internet radio stations using the HEOS TuneIn app, but once they went to actually play any station, nothing would play. Well, I don't know that means that the receiver is still connected. Right. Furthermore, they're able to use the Apple AirPlay to send audio from their Tidal app on their iPhones to the Marantz, so they've left it at that for now as somewhat of a workaround. But if we have any other ideas why none of the built-in HEOS apps are able to play anything, he'd love to hear them. I question whether or not, because AirPlay is not over internet streaming and over Wi-Fi.
It does rely on the Wi-Fi network, but not an internet connection.
Yeah.
So maybe you're connected to your Wi-Fi router, but not the internet somehow. Yeah.
So and browsing the internet stations on your app, I think, is just using the internet on your phone. It's not using the internet on the Marantz. So this is one of those cases where I'm like, listen, I've said 1,000 times, people do not like, oh, I've got apps on my TV, why don't I just use those? Because your TV was built to be a TV and not so much like a device that connects to the internet really super well. And I think it's the same case with a lot of receivers. They're really good at being receivers, but they're not so good at all the other little things, and there's not as high a quality of components that are put in there. So getting an actual device to do the other stuff is kind of the way to go. But with HEOS, you're kind of stuck with what's there. And it sounds to me like your internet is not working on your Marantz.
Yeah, I have, this would be, I don't know how you would try to walk them through over the phone or on a video chat or something like that. But I actually kind of just recently went through this with a device that my father was trying to set up for his telescope, which is that we just switched our internet service both at my apartment once I ever get to move back in there and here at my parents' place, switched our internet service, which meant, got a new modem, and that has a Wi-Fi router built into that modem from the internet service provider. And being a newest one, it's not using the regular default IP gateways that like all our previous routers used. Like almost all routers used to, their default gateway was 192.168.0.1, and like that's what his telescope device was set up to look for as the default gateway. It's like, nope, the new ones are 10.0.0.1, and all of the IP addresses that they assign on your local network start with a 10.0 rather than a 192.168. And it's like all these other devices by default, that's what they had plugged in as their first two triplet values in their IP addresses. And I'm just like, is there a chance your parents got a new internet service provider, modem and router or something like that? Is there any chance that, this really is just an internet connection problem because the default gateway that the Marantz is looking for, it's like it's some number it's not used to looking for anymore? So I mean, I just put in the instructions since like their iPhones seem to be working, right? There's a method for doing the entire network setup on the Marantz through iOS. So if your iOS device is already connected to the internet, then it'll just copy the settings over to the Marantz through the iOS device method of getting the Marantz connected. And I'm like, maybe you could just try going through that with them, because that I think you could even do over the phone with them. The instructions aren't super duper complicated to do it that way. And I'm just thinking this is an IT problem. This is a network connection problem. If it really isn't, I have no other idea other than getting in touch with Marantz customer service directly, because who knows, maybe there's something wrong with the network card in the Marantz itself or something like that. At that point, that would be my only remaining idea.
Okay. He went ahead and set his Panasonic UB420 Ultra HD Blu-ray player to output SDR at all times, even with HDR discs, but to use BT 2020 color for HDR titles. This is with his Epson 3800 projector. There was no quick way to switch between HDR output and SDR output from the player, so he couldn't do a direct A/B comparison, but from the scenes he tested, he thinks keeping the SDR with BT 2020 setting is a small improvement. With that done, he tried pressing the option button on his remote while a movie was playing. He poked around the settings and came across sound effects, which was on, and set it to use night surround. On his projector?
No, on his player, on the Panasonic player. Yeah.
In the manual, night surround described enjoying loud movies when you keep the volume low at night and keeping things easy to hear. That seemed like messing with the signal in some way, so we turned it off. Was that the right thing to do?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's dynamic range compression.
It certainly sounds like that. Make the loud things quiet and the quiet things loud.
And then what about the rest of the sound effects options? There's all these settings for remaster, frequency settings, dialogue enhancer, etc. How should all those be set? Off, generally speaking.
But this also, just going through the manual, just clued me in, because it mentions right in there that the sound effects options are only available if your output is set to PCM.
Yeah.
That's the only time these sound effects options are anything other than grayed out or invisible, is when your digital audio output via HDMI or optical has been set to PCM. So if these were there and active and available to be changed, that makes me think that you must have the audio set to PCM. Now, there's a very easy reason why the audio output on your Panasonic UB420 player might be set to PCM, and that would be if you have secondary audio, Blu-ray secondary audio turned on, which it is by default. By default, Blu-ray secondary audio is set to on, and if you want to have bitstream outputs, which is just Dolby Digital signal comes out of the player and relies on your AV receiver to decode it, or Dolby Atmos or DTS-X comes out of the player straight off of the disc and leaves it up to your AV receiver to decode it, you need to turn secondary audio off. That is the only way that you will get bit streams to come out and allow your AV receiver to do the audio decoding, rather than things being decoded inside of the Panasonic player ahead of time and forcing it to output PCM audio rather than bit streams. There is another setting that is this is just within the standard setup menu under the audio section. There's another setting called voice guidance, which is the annoying automated voice that talks to you to tell you what the settings do. If that is on, then it will force PCM output. You have to turn voice guidance off as well in order to be able to use bit streams. So I believe that is all of what is responsible for what's going on here. Almost certainly secondary audio setting that you need to turn off. Then both Dolby and DTS should be set to bitstream. When you do that, all of these sound effects options, if you can still see them, they'll just be grayed out. You won't be able to use them anymore. So this actually hinted at probably a larger problem than you were even worried about. If for some reason you knew all this and you manually set it to PCM output because that's what you wanted to use for some reason, like Tom said, all those sound effects things should just be turned off. They're all just messing with the signal in some way that you don't need.
Yeah. JT was going through some of our old episodes. He heard us talking about crossovers, how they work with Odyssey and other AV receiver settings. He heard us mention something about turning a certain knob either off or up as high as it can go. Was that the subwoofer's own crossover knob? He has it set to 80 hertz, but if changing where that knob could improve his bass, he'd like to do so. Could we go over this subject and explain how it should be and why? This is very simple, okay? And we were talking about the subwoofer crossover. I have an article. I'll link it up. But
sure.
The subwoofer crossover knob on the back of your sub.
Yeah.
You want to turn it up as high as possible, or to default, or to off, or to LFE, or whatever the setting is that turns it off.
Yeah, on different subs, they'll have different labels. Some of them, the very highest setting of the crossover knob will actually just say bypass or LFE or something like that, but that would mean you're turning the crossover knob as high as it will go. Some have a separate switch for a bypass setting or an LFE in setting or something like that, and that is where you would want to set that switch to the bypass or LFE setting.
Right. The idea here is that you want the subwoofer crossover. You want the crossover to be handled by the AV receiver. What it's doing is taking any sounds from any speakers that are set to small,
which should be all of them.
Should be all of them, always. Actually, I wrote an article about that too, but I don't think it's published yet. Because I got tired of people saying, "Well, what if my speaker?" No. It's always small. No, but what if your speaker could be the size of a house, and
even
it's
if
still
it has
small?
Powered bass woofers built into it.
Yeah, it's always
still
small.
set it to small.
All your speakers should be set to small, but that's another conversation. You're asking about this, but every speaker that is set to small, the bass that is below the crossover point, and it's a little bit more complicated than that, but we're just going to simplify it slightly. All the bass that's below the crossover point will be sent to your subwoofer. Okay, so but it's not all sent like a brick wall filter. It's not like, okay, if you said that 80 hertz, like 80 hertz and up is played by your speakers, 79 and down is played by your sub. That's not how it works. The subwoofer actually plays a little bit higher than 80, right, and the speakers play a little bit lower than 80. That's why it's called a crossover, because it slowly crosses the sounds over from the speakers into the subwoofer. The subwoofer slowly takes over. Okay.
Yeah.
But there is a slope to that. Okay. There's a slope to that. So, which means that as the volume decreases slowly from the speakers, it increases slowly to match from the subwoofer. And when they're playing the same notes, they're playing at such a volume so that together it is back up to even though they're both playing below what we would consider to be like the reference level, it pushes them both additively. They are back up at that reference level. Yeah. If you have two what we call cascading crossovers, where the crossover on the subwoofer is doing one thing and the subwoofer crossover and the AV receiver is doing the same thing, it changes that slope, which means all around your crossover point, everything's going to be too quiet.
It makes the slopes too steep because you've applied one filter from the AV receiver already, and then an additional filter from the subwoofer itself if that crossover knob has been set at, say, 80 hertz, like exactly what he said he's got his set to right now. Yeah. Completely understandable that you did that, because that advice is straight out there, and then if you didn't see that advice exactly, there's the whole 80 hertz crossover thing in your mind and going, oh, that's where everybody says to set your crossover. Here's a knob on the back of my subwoofer that is labeled crossover. I guess I set that to 80 hertz. You cannot be blamed for having come to that conclusion, but we're saying you turn that crossover knob as high as you can. There's one other aspect I'll just mention about this, which is that there is also the dedicated LFE channel. That is its own channel, the low frequency effects channel. It is not strictly tied to any speaker. It's just its own channel, all by itself, low frequency effects. Now, if you have a subwoofer and you have your AV receiver set to use its subwoofer output, the low frequency effects channel gets sent out of the subwoofer output and nowhere else. It's only coming out of the subwoofer output. And the low frequency effects channel has sounds in it as high as 120 hertz. If you have your subwoofer's own built-in crossover knob set to 80, that means it is filtering off sounds above 80. It's not, like Tom says, not a brick wall, but it means that all the sounds above 80 hertz are getting quieter and quieter. So if this sound from the low frequency effects channel comes along at 120 hertz and it was supposed to be at 110 decibels or something like that, well, your subwoofer, if you've set its crossover knob to 80, it's made it quieter. It's made that 120 hertz sound in the dedicated LFE channel quieter than the signal said it should be. So that's another reason why we just take that crossover knob on the subwoofer and turn it as high as it'll go. It's often 160 or 180 or 200 hertz or something like that is the highest setting. But that means the subwoofer itself isn't filtering anything until 160 or 180 or 200 hertz or something like that, well above the 120 hertz that might be coming from that dedicated LFE channel. So that's another reason to turn that knob as high as it'll go.
Bret's friend wants to get a new TV and soundbar for his basement. He's using just a TV with his built-in speakers at the moment. He wants to go larger, something in 65-inch to 77-inch range. Scroll up.
We did talk about some 77-inch options for sure earlier in this episode.
And he wants dialogue to be easier to understand than what his current TV speakers are delivering. He really does not want a whole speaker system, and he wants to keep the price on the lower side. So no KEF LS60 metas here.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to be... I'm tired,
diplomatic.
And this coffee is not waking me up enough, and I'm a little cranky. So, Bret, tell your friend not to listen to this, that you'll translate from Mad Tom to English. Bret already suggested getting an LG OLED, but and Bret has more than one LG OLED himself, and he loves them, but he's also a gamer and has left games on pause many, many times and never had any problems with burn-in so far. So he told his friend who wants to connect to PS5 and was worried his kids might leave the games on pause, that gaming on an OLED is perfectly fine. But why do we have to say anything? What do we say? I mean, if you've already tested it and shown that, just tell them to buy one of your TVs. Just sell them one of your TVs.
Actually, that's not a terrible
You
option.
Just say, hey, you know what? You were going to spend $1,500 on a TV? Give me $1,500. I'll give you my TV. This is a TV that you know will not get burn in.
Right.
Because I've tested it, and it's never gotten it before. Give me the money, and we're no longer friends, because that never ends well. He says, could a QLED or a mini LED backlit TV be a better choice here? Get that stupid TCL that Rob was talking about. I mean, it's not stupid. Get the TCL Rob was talking about at the beginning of this whole thing.
I mean, you could. I strongly doubt you'd be disappointed if you did.
It's big, right? It's big. It's
$1,400 for the 75-inch, so you can't beat that price.
That's what I'm going to recommend. I'm going to recommend that, and don't get a soundbar, you dork.
Well, I've got one soundbar that I am, because there is one and only one soundbar out there that I do not feel bad about purchasing, which is sort of my threshold for soundbars. But so
you don't feel like it was a war crime when you got it.
If you want the best of the best, I mean, I'm just going to point you to a C1 OLED all day. The 77-inch size is $2,700 right now, which isn't the lowest price it's ever been, because they are pretty much out of stock most places now. But you can still find C1 OLEDs in the 77-inch size around, and $2,700 is about as inexpensive as it gets. The LG OLEDs are kind of the only game in town for doing everything that the consoles can do. Now, didn't mention Xbox Series X, but if you want to do Dolby Vision at 120 hertz with variable refresh rate, which is like all the green check marks, LG's OLEDs are like the only TVs that do Dolby Vision at 120 hertz with VRR. That wouldn't be a concern with a PS5, since a PS5 doesn't do Dolby Vision in any form whatsoever. But for an Xbox Series X, if you want all the check marks, then an LG OLED is the only way to go. So yeah, there's that. But at $1,400, nearly half the price, there is that 75-inch TCL, which if you were for gaming, that's got almost everything. Won't do Dolby Vision at 120 hertz, but it'll do it at 60 hertz. So yeah, that could be an option there. I think that's about it. I think it's going to be one of those two, and it's just going to be on price. It's going to be on if he can afford the OLED, get the OLED.
Yes, which soundbar do we recommend? Rob's got one. I recommend you not get a soundbar. I also recommend you put something behind your head to catch the slap echo, because that's almost certainly what your problem is, and buying a soundbar is not going to help. I cannot tell you how often people, including my own parents, get a soundbar because they want better sound so that they can understand what's being said on TV, and then still live with the subtitles on because they still can't understand it. And the reason they can't understand it has nothing to do with the soundbar or the TV speakers, has everything to do with the fact that there's a slap echo behind them, and the acoustics in the room are terrible. They just need to buy some room treatments. And while I'm not going to say you should stick with the TV speakers and get room treatments, I'm going to say you should get some room treatments, especially one right behind your head, and also get 2 speakers. And I think you can go with powered speakers if you really want to. I mean, there's, of course, the LS60s that you mentioned. The LS50s are out there as well. Those are really expensive. But Fluence makes them. And I reviewed a pair, and they are perfectly serviceable. Monoprice makes them. They're perfectly serviceable.
SVS
and they're
has the second generation of their Prime Wireless that now do have a remote. So, that could be another option too. A little bit more expensive.
There's just options out there. So I would highly recommend you look into a pair of powered bookshelf speakers and go with that rather than a crappy soundbar and also room treatments.
Yeah, I like those Fluences too. And they come with a remote, so they work perfectly well as just a stereo pair to go along with your TV. I am not going to disagree whatsoever. But if soundbar is the only thing in mind, that's the form factor they want. Like I mentioned, there is one soundbar in the world that I do not feel terrible about using. If I owned it, I might actually use it, and that is Vizio's M series M512A. A does stand for Atmos. H6. It goes for $500 brand new. You can definitely find them out there for $400. That is certainly a price point for the Vizio M512A H6 that is available out there. So it is a 5.1.2 system. The included sub in there is honestly not too bad. It genuinely gets down to like 32 hertz, which for subwoofers that come with soundbars is better than you can usually expect. The main thing is actually outputs pretty darn decent sound quality, comes with the speakers that can go at the back of the room. They actually plug in with a wire to the subwoofer, so that does usually mean you're going to position the subwoofer like near your seat and then have the wires going from the subwoofer to the speakers, but the connection between the subwoofer and the soundbar itself is wireless. So that's like the only soundbar, not subwoofer, the only soundbar that I feel pretty good about recommending to people, because spending more doesn't make sense to me. If you're going to spend more, then get proper speakers, and spending less is a terrible time. So that's the one.
All right. Ryan, first an update. A little over a month ago, Ryan was asking if any projector around the $2,000 mark or less could offer a substantial improvement in black levels and color accuracy over his Optima UHD55 he had purchased. We said to strongly consider getting a refurbished Epson model directly from Epson, and when he found a 6040 UB available, he thought it was settled, or we thought it was settled. Somebody thought it was settled.
We thought it was done. Well, that's what I thought he was going to get.
But in the end, he and his wife agreed to spend just a little bit more, and they wound up getting a refurbished 5050 UB. Movies finally look the way they should, at least to his eyes. It's beautiful, he says. The black levels and contrast are impressive. The colors look nice, and he thinks there's a bit of red push, but he hasn't done any calibration yet, so he's confident that it can be dialed in, unlike the way his former Optima looked. So now on to other topics. His next project is to dial in his projector.
Well, not really, because the next thing will have a little bit of an impact on it.
His next project is to repaint his home theater. He'll almost certainly go with something from the Gray Screen series from Sherwin-Williams. It made a massive difference in my room, so much so that I haven't even noticed it. Like we always talk about, but he's toying with the idea of making his whole front wall completely black. Would black paint be sufficient, or should he put up black velvet fabric? Is there an easy way to hang the fabric if he goes that route, or is there a peel and stick solution that we would recommend? So I am always going to recommend that you put the fabric up. Now, I think you can paint the room gray.
Yeah. And I will just say Sherwin-Williams has their Tricorn Black, which is a very, very black paint. So as long as you get it in a not glossy finish, I would probably go with the velvet finish, which is like one step below satin. If you get the Tricorn Black paint, that's going to be a darn black front wall. So that is an option.
Yeah, I would recommend just picking a color that's reasonable. I mean, I think mine looks all right. It's in the fabric. I mean, the gray screen line. I'm doing two things at once. The gray screen line, and it's called Software, I believe, is the one that I got, which is not the darkest, but it is on the darker side. I think it's not overly dark. It doesn't look oppressive in here, but it's nice neutral color. I don't think anybody's going to walk in here and think they need to repaint this room. I could be wrong. I could be. Somebody could be
just
fully
for preference, of course, they might want to repaint it. But
it certainly is not like you have painted your ceiling black and somebody walks in and goes, "Oh, what is actually going on in this room?" So I would say paint it a neutral color if you don't like the color that's in there, or don't and just get the fabric and put it up someplace. And there are a bunch of ways you can hang that fabric. So everything from just using curtain rods to double the Velcro pieces that you can put up there that are double-sided. Those are really easy to work.
That's probably the easiest way. I mean, of course, you can just staple or tack nail it up there and then just put a little bit of trim to hide it. A little bit of trim to hide that. And you can use the fabric wall systems, which is the stretched fabric system. You can get the thin depth, the half-inch depth of those plastic tracks that then just grip the fabric. And you can have a stretched fabric wall system. I consider those kind of grossly overpriced for pieces of plastic that hold fabric onto your wall. But if you want a very, very clean look and removable, then that is an option to go with. It's fabric-wall.com. You do need to contact them because they're mostly sell-through dealers, but they will sell just to individuals. So those are options there. You could get the baritone black velvet from Seymour AV. Those come in 5-foot wide bolts, and they're $11 per linear foot, basically. So if you really want black velvet fabric, that is a really good option there. But honestly, myself, I'm kind of leaning just towards going paint. One thing with fabric is you might want to double check with your municipality because sometimes wall coverings have to be fire rated, and a lot of fabrics are not fire rated. So paint will be no problem in those instances. You can definitely paint your wall with the tricorn black paint and not have to worry about fire ratings whatsoever. So given how easy that is, given that you're going to be painting anyway, I might just go with the tricorn black paint. That's me.
My dog just made a sound, and that sound often precedes an upchuck. So I'm just watching. All right, Ryan has extended family members that will be moving in with him, so he'd like to expand the number of seats in this theater by adding a second row on a riser, just an 86-inch wide couch. There are lots of plans online for seating risers. He'd like to build his own on the cheap. His on the cheap. Okay. So is there a simple, trusted plan that we can follow for him, to point to him to follow? And also, almost all plans say to use pressure-treated lumber to make sure there aren't any issues with moisture, but those are also for risers going into basement home theaters with concrete foundation floors. He just wants to build a non-permanent riser that will sit on top of existing carpet in an upstairs room. So is regular lumber okay to use in this case? I believe so. It
is. It's just that if you are moving it somewhere in the future, then why not just spend a little bit extra and get the pressure-treated lumber now? There's the option that Home Cinema Guru suggested, which is to just have a small layer on the bottom of pressure-treated wood and then regular lumber for the rest. So that is an option that you could do too. That'll keep the price down a little bit. So that's one way that you could do things. And I kind of would, because if the whole idea is for these to be potentially movable, then I wouldn't want to cheap out now and then completely limit yourself in the future. So maybe just make the bottom half an inch out of pressure treated wood, and then the rest can be the regular stuff. So I have a very simple plan that I found on YouTube from a DIY fellow. Super easy to look at. They basically look exactly the same as HT Market's pre-made sort of sectional risers, which again are very easy to move around. So you can look at what they've done over at HT Market and then just copy for yourself. You can follow the plans. I'll have the link for this particular DIY riser. I mean, very simple. Just built a frame with something to put a platform on top of and then carpeted over it. So that's some simple plans that can definitely be done.
You could always use those bed risers that, what's his name? Ted used.
Yeah.
You have to get like a little
and
step
Daz
ladder.
Too. Daz used some bed risers at some point, I'm pretty sure.
So as mentioned, his theater is in an upstairs room. He has attic access above the theater. He wants to install some Sonos Mag 6 in-ceiling speakers that he has already purchased and can run all the wires in the attic without too much trouble. However, in the summer, his attic gets over 120 degrees, and he doesn't want to run his HVAC system, ruin his HVAC system by putting big holes in the ceiling. So are the Sonos back cans for those Mag 6 speakers sufficient for maintaining the thermal break between his theater, ceiling, and the attic? I mean,
not on their own, but the insulation that you're going to lay over top of them is.
Yeah. That's not what they're for. They are for fire rating and not having open holes into your attic there. But yes, you will put insulation back on top, and then
the whole idea is above your attic there you should have a thick layer of insulation. That's the blanket on your house. That's the thermal break, and you definitely need those retrofit back cans on the back of the Mag 6 speakers. That prevents the insulation from getting into the speakers and mucking something up, and it's also your fire rating. I would suggest in the case of the Mag 6 speakers, since they don't come with a gasket for the part that where the speaker meets the ceiling itself, once you've got them installed, just put a little layer of caulk around there so that you've got a full airtight seal. That's really all that's necessary. Or get a gasket. Get a gasket that's the right circumference and have that installed along with it. So just a warning there, they don't come with a gasket, but that's an easy fix with just a bead of caulk around it once they're already up there.
Along similar lines, there is currently a sealed closet at the back of the theater that he will eventually use to house all of his gear. What's going to be the best way to cool it? Does he need a cold air intake, or will a fan to exhaust hot air into the attic be good enough? And since his attic gets so hot, would putting a hole for a fan at the top of the closet actually result in the hot air coming down from the attic into the closet, and the reverse of what he wants to have happen? Well, you understand how air moves to begin with, because hot air doesn't come down unless it gets pushed. It rises. So what you want is either a large enough air gap underneath that door to allow air to come in, or like if you see like an air handler door, that's like if you have a closet with an air handler in it, the door will have like louvers or some sort of grate at the bottom of it. You want that. And then if you really want to make sure that the air is getting pulled through, which I don't know that you want to, but you do, then you would put an exhaust fan at the top that you could turn
into
on
the attic.
And I've got there are switches that you can install that that go over that connect to your exhaust fan that can be set for temperatures, set for humidity. In my case, I have one in my bathroom that is set for humidity, and when the humidity gets to a certain level, the exhaust fan kicks on.
Definitely.
And that's you can do that, and have the same thing with your little closet there. When it gets so hot, the exhaust fan kicks on. When it cools down, the exhaust fan kicks off. So
as long as the HVAC that's already present in your home theater, if that's already at a nice cool temperature, then that's sufficient, as long as there is a way for that air that's already temperature controlled and cool inside the home theater, as long as there is a path for that to get into the closet. So you're not going to put an airtight sealed door on the closet, but there has to be some way for that cool air to get in. But as long as there is, that's fine. Then you'll have an exhaust at the top of that closet going into the attic space. If your attic is getting hotter than the outside temperature, because I mean, hey, there are places where it is 114 degrees in the summer, so it's with the sun coming down, it's not uncommon for the attic to be 120 degrees. But if it's actually getting to the point where you're getting like heat rot and problem like that, then you're going to want to look at actually getting your more ventilation into the roof of your building itself, because it shouldn't be getting crazily hotter than outside. The uncontrolled area is inside your attic. It should be roughly the same temperature as the outside air. That's the whole idea. So if you don't have sufficient venting in your roof already, a ridge vent, of course, at the very top of the roof is the best that you can do. Then maybe you actually need a little bit more venting in that roof. A lot of houses do, so that wouldn't be the terriblest thing to look at.
Right. Eric, first up, what would we think of adding a Roast the Room segment to our podcast? Eric likes the idea of listeners submitting photos or us pulling pictures from forums and then lightheartedly roasting all the ways the rooms and setups could be improved. He thinks this would be entertaining and educational.
I'm not going to pull anything from forums.
I can't be bothered. You want to send your room in, Eric. If anybody wants to get their room roasted, knock it out, man.
That would be a question.
That's a question at avrant.com. Send it in. Say, what do you think of my room? I mean, people do that all the time. They just don't phrase it in that way.
Sure.
They say, here's a picture of my room. Where should I put my speakers?
Yeah.
And we say,
these
are all the other things that are wrong with your room as well. And another thing. So, yes. Sure. Fine.
Yep.
Great suggestion.
I will say I wouldn't do it unrequested. But if
Yes.
somebody themselves of their own volition says, please do this, then that's fine. I consider that a question, and I would oblige that.
If you ever want to hear me roast a room, sit next to me as I scroll through Reddit or any other forum.
And there's that, yes.
And I see a picture, I'm like, what the actual heck is going on in this room? Wait, did you, is this a troll? Is this a troll? Are you trolling us?
It's Reddit. Many things are.
We've been following the progression of Eric's garage home theater for quite a while now, and to answer a question that we asked, yes, the garage door is still functional and can open. It has always been useless as an actual place to park a car. He has no idea why the prior owner constructed it the way he did, but he enjoys being able to open it during football season so the projection screen can be seen from the fire pit outside. So, TV too high.
It's a projection screen.
If you're looking at the picture, the screen is above the back of the couch. Like you can see over the back of the couch from the outside of the garage.
When you're standing up,
when you're standing, I know. It's just funny. Anyways, it looks good. The garage started out pretty bare with open rafters, bare sidewalls, and just some pyramid foam attached to the garage door at the back of the theater before Eric knew any better about acoustic treatments. So he had his projection set up and Polk speakers and a couple of end-ceiling speakers mounted in the ceiling. So, yeah. On our advice, and gradually over time, he has filled the front section of his open ceiling with Rockwool insulation and covered it with speaker grove cloth. He has also made some DIY panels to hang as first reflection points on the side walls. He has upgraded to Ascend CMT 340 speakers up front with HTM 200 SE surrounds, improved the look of his front wall with black curtains, and now he has installed Rockwool insulation on the garage door at the back of the room. So it's starting to come together here with all these pictures. Here we go. He's happy with all the changes he's made, but he's always looking to keep doing more. So at this point, he hasn't ever taken any measurements with Room EQ Wizard. It's on my screen. Oh,
I have no idea.
That's my cursor.
That'll be there.
Or anything. Okay, he hasn't taken any measurements with Room EQ Wizard. From listening to us, he just assumes he would benefit from adding corner bass traps, and in the vertical corners of his room couldn't hurt, right? That is also true. He was thinking of adding corner bass traps at the back of the room, but since he still wants to be able to open that garage door sometimes, he was thinking of making them freestanding. They don't need to be pretty. So what would be our recommendations for how to build them? What materials would he need, and how tall would they need to be? As tall as possible.
I mean, I did want to just mention right off the bat, though, that because he has so much in the ceiling, and the ceiling is, there's a pretty good depth to that you're not in the situation that most rooms are in, which is that most rooms have no bass trapping when they begin.
Well, he's got that with his at the apex of his ceiling.
That's
he's got
right.
insulation going across it, so it's just like having a panel straddle a corner of your room, which is
that's right.
The alternative to having the tri-trap solution, which is the chunk trap solution.
Yeah.
So you kind of got some bass trapping going on in here.
You definitely have some bass trapping already. So that's why I'm like, in my opinion, in this setup, you don't necessarily need to worry so much about having your vertical corners filled with bass traps, because you have some bass trapping, which is not the case for most people. Most people were like, the first thing you need is some bass trapping to adjust the crossover region, and the corners are probably going to be the better place to do that in most rooms. But he had these open rafters, filled that all in. I'm like, I don't really think if you measured, if you listened, that there's a tremendous amount more bass trapping that you actually need to do. So,
I was thinking about this the other day because I was reading a post on something about how Odyssey made everything sound worse. And one of the things that I want people to start doing is I want them to even if they're unwilling to download sweeps, which they should do sweeps, but even if they're unwilling to download sweeps, if they could just play some music or something, or a scene on a movie or something like that, they can kind of play it on repeat easily, to just do that and walk around their rooms a little bit. Just move around your space. I think that's what, like, before this, everybody's like, oh, you need a U-Mic 1 and Rummy Q Wizard to know anything. That's bull, okay? It's bull.
Listen to sweeps. I base it on what I hear from sweeps playing on repeat, not
if you
from
can
the
walk around your room and it doesn't sound like dramatically different from place to place, I don't think you need Rummy Q Wizard in a U-Mic 1. I think you're good enough at that point. I mean, I think that should tell you, like, if in my space with lots of room treatments and a closed door and dual subwoofers, right? I can take a sound bar, I could put it up front, I could play a sweep through it, not with the Odyssey or anything else engaged, and just lean around my room and go, oh yeah, I can hear some differences. Okay, but when how my speakers and Odyssey and everything else is all calibrated and set up properly, I move around my room, I don't hear crap. It all sounds the same. From seat to seat, from place to place. The differences are when you're at the edges of the couches and you're now sitting directly in front of one speaker instead of between the two of them, then you hear a difference in sound. You're at the back of the room and you're in front of the surround speakers, then you hear a difference in the sound. But I'm not hearing like tonal differences or bass differences from space to space. I think that's what you need to do in this room. Just move around.
Like I say, my prediction would be that like you say, adding more bass traps kind of never hurts, but I don't think you're in the situation now that you have treated your ceiling so heavily that you're really honestly going to notice any sort of big difference. So I wouldn't worry in your case about the vertical corners too much, but if you were to do this, I would just build triangles. I would have a little triangular base. I would cut triangles of insulation, just like you would for super chunks, but since you want to be able to move them around, I would just have a triangular base. I'd have vertical things that come up from the corner of each of those. I'd have the triangle insulation inside there and a triangle on the top, and maybe you can stack two things together. You make them each 3.5 feet tall or something like that, and you could stack one on top of the other, and you could have 4 of them and fill up a vertical corner, that type of thing. But I suspect play some sweeps and you might discover you don't really need any more bass trapping in here.
So if I were him, you know what I would do? I would build either freestanding panels or install some more insulation between the top of his screen and like angled up towards the insulation that's in the... So you're basically going to make like a panel that goes across that corner at the very front. Yeah. Visually, getting something black up there would make
that'll fill that all in. Yeah.
And this would do way more for your bass trapping than, having a couple of triangles. The other thing I would consider doing is what I've done with my tri-traps, which is just lying them on the ground, right? But again, you don't need to build a triangular trap for this. You just need to build a regular 2x4 panel, except angle the edges so that you can just put it right against a wall. Just bevel it. That's what I would do. I don't think you need to go the whole way. And you could put those on the side walls. You could put the front walls. You can put them wherever. I don't think you need to worry so much about the back. That big, massive panel of insulation at the back of your room on that garage door is like a slap where slap echoes go to die. It's just,
which is a good thing. We're happy about that.
I love that thing back there. It makes my heart happy to have the entire back wall, like 4 feet high and like 12 feet wide.
Yep.
Just insulation makes me very pleased. So yeah, I think you're doing fine. I don't know where we are. C? Are we on C?
We are.
So he asked about getting 4 speakers put overhead, and we said the SVS Prime satellites he had in mind would be fine. We also suggested some other alternatives, including the monoprice THX satellites, which he ended up buying during their Labor Day sale at $200 a pair, half the price of the Prime satellites. I think that's a good purchase. But then we did what we said.
Oh, he said. He did.
Then he did what we've said never to do. He went looking at reviews after having bought them. He does have a 30-day return window. Oh, do not listen to reviews. Now he's worried about their low efficiency spec. They are like 3 feet above your head. Shut up. And relatively small driver. He's thinking maybe he needs something bigger. Some people have claimed they work best with a crossover set around 110, which would be fine for Atmos speakers.
Sure would, yes. And also, I don't disagree that they probably do work best with a crossover of about 110.
Yeah, even though their specs say they plane down to 80 hertz, and people are saying that Atmos channels do still get full range signals, so it would be better to get speakers that can support that. Yes, you should get tower speakers and suspend them from your ceiling. And of all the people that have ever written in here, you're one of the few that could do that easily with your exposed drivers.
Right.
Don't listen to people. People are stupid. He does already have a pair of Ascend HDM 200 SE speakers on hand, so he's thinking maybe he'll try to compare them head-to-head as overhead Atmos speakers and see if the monoprice THX speakers are just too small and low in output to cut it for Atmos. But would we say you should just return them right away and either get the SVS Prime satellites or more Ascend HDM 200s right away? Save him the time and hassle of trying to compare. Do not even bother. If you're going to do it anyways, so I'm going to say don't. I guess. Because it's easier for me to... Because I'm right and you're wrong. But
these will have no problem covering the... Well, I mean, granted, he's got the open rafter, so the 5 feet of distance between you and the overhead speakers rather than 4 feet. They will have no problem with that. Yes, in their spec, they are lower efficiency than most bookshelf speakers because they're little satellites. But for Atmos, my goodness, they are fine. Don't spend more. You don't need to. If we can set your mind at ease, if you want to compare them head-to-head with your HDM 200 SEs, by all means, knock yourself out because you've already got them. But I'm not going to tell you to send them back and replace them with something else. I think the monoprice THX satellites are just fine for Atmos
It's
speakers.
A ludicrous thing to worry about. And it's only from people who I guarantee you have never heard the speakers.
Yeah.
These are people who have looked at the specs and have decided that they know better.
Yes.
Or somebody else looked at the specs, said something, and they're just parroting it. That's all it is. So lastly, he says, just a note, he bought a refurbished Denon X3700H receiver directly from Denon. It was a hassle as their online shopping cart system gave him all sorts of problems. He wound up having to call them on the phone, create a customer service ticket, and it took him a week to actually get the order placed. But they ended up giving him an additional 15% off, so it was worth it in the end since he definitely got the lowest price.
Congratulations. Very nice receiver.
I don't know if that's... I don't know. I guess how much time is your 15% worth?
I mean, it's done now, so congrats.
Yeah. Infinite Gary. Gary had an MLB game on TV, but he wanted to listen to a different play-by-play team. So he also had the game playing on FM radio. However, the FM broadcast seemed to have a delay of about 8 seconds. At some point, the FM station announced they were dropping the MLB game to broadcast an NFL game instead. So Gary turned on their sister AM station and discovered that one was perfectly in sync with the TV broadcast. Is there a technical reason why the FM station was lagged 8 seconds behind the AM station and the TV broadcast?
They're almost certainly simulcasting that on digital, so there is the analog to digital conversion going on and the typical lag between digital stations and analog stations. That's my guess. My guess is their FM station is also simulcast on digital, so they're just putting it all out there at the same time. That'd be my guess.
I just remember the Super Bowl with the nip slip. Everybody remembers that one? I remember watching that game, and we were must have been one of the first people in the neighborhood that had a DVR on our cable box, and everything was delayed by 5 seconds or something like that. So we'd hear a cheer, and then from people in the apartments all around us, and then we would see the play. It was very annoying. If you are setting, this is also Gary. If you are setting up a 2.1 system using an integrated amp that does not have any bass management, and therefore both speakers and the subwoofers are getting a full range signal, is it better to start with the subwoofer's crossover knob turned up high and then work your way down, or start with it set low and work your way up?
I mean, I would play sweeps just through the speakers by themselves, no subwoofer at all. And given that Gary really only has one seat in his setups, I'm not even worried about sitting in all 3 seats across a couch and seeing how low the speakers are able to play before we start getting any noticeable difference from seat to seat. So I would just kind of play a sweep in the one seat that Gary's in, speakers by themselves, no subwoofer at all, see how low it can go before I start noticing any sort of, up or down in the volume of that sweep down at the bass end. And then I would set the crossover, the subwoofer, higher than that frequency where that starts to happen. That'd be my approach.
David and his wife are having some remodeling done in their great room. It's a 2-story space, all hardwood and reflective with big windows, and it's open to the kitchen and the rest of the main floor. So it's the furthest thing acoustically from a dedicated theater space. Nevertheless, I like to be able to enjoy watching TV in their headphones.
That would be the best quality.
And the plans include a faux chimney that protrudes from the wall. The fireplace at the bottom will be functional, but there isn't anything actually above it, so having a recessed space above the mantle for a TV is no problem. They've agreed to an 83-inch OLED, and David's plans have it mounted as low as possible just above the mantle to avoid having to look upwards at it. His wife does not want any speakers to be visible, and neither of them want to see wires or mounting hardware, so it's all been designed with a built-in look. David has allocated 5.5 inches above the TV as a space to install the front 3 speakers. He'll be using a Denon AV receiver, so he's trying to think of a way to use separate LCR speakers, but given the look and form factor they're going for, a soundbar seems more likely. However, they've used a Sonos Playbar plus Sonos Sub in this room before, and his wife always complained about not being able to understand the dialogue clearly. It is not the speakers, my dude. I don't know what to tell you. There is no speakers we can tell you to buy that is going to fix the acoustics in this room. So, yeah. And again, he's going to ask for a sound. He did come across Golden Ear's Super Cinema 3D XL passive soundbar, which would work with his Denon receiver, but at $2,000. He'd only be willing to buy if there isn't anything else that could work at a lower price. So do we have any I suggest you not do any of this, honestly. But so putting all 3 speakers above this TV, which is what he's kind of doing here, I think is... I don't see the point. You're not getting stereo separation whatsoever. So either put just 2 speakers up there, because it's going to be basically mono anyways, or like you said, a soundbar.
I have a solution that checks all the boxes that he wants. I'm going to warn you that because of the acoustics of this room, you very well still might have dialogue intelligibility problems. I am going to say that this solution, what it is putting out into the room, is superior to what the TV speakers are doing, but by the time it reaches yours, I don't know how good it's going to be. And that is one of KEF's passive soundbars, the HTF8003 to be specific. It's about 5 inches tall, so should just fit into that 5.5-inch space that you've left, and comes with wall mounting capability. Just has 3 sets of binding posts on the back of it to connect to a regular AV receiver, and it goes for $950 MSRP, so it's less than half the price of the Golden Ear solution, which is very similar idea, passive speaker bar, a passive sound bar. But I will definitely vouch for at least what is coming out of that KEF passive soundbar, the HTF 8003. It's a good speaker, but by the time it reaches your ears in this room, it might not be great, but it checks all the boxes at least.
Yeah. Mantle mount too might be something you might consider.
They don't want to see any hardware though, so
well, you won't see crazy it about that. If you install the mount inside of a cavity so that the TV goes flush,
but when it pulls down, you'll see it if you're looking from the side. So.
But you're not looking from the side because you're sitting in front of the TV.
Somebody might be looking from the side.
Dog, leave that dog alone. She's sleeping. Don't step on that. Oh, you're such a big lug. Hold on, I gotta see what he's doing.
Uh-huh.
It's
Tom's
it's
distracted
very
by doggos.
exciting. Okay, he's going.
Great pod.
Any ideas for a wireless subwoofer? Yeah, any subwoofer that I mean, first of all, there's no wireless. You have to plug it in. So there's a wire. There's
Sure.
one right there. But the best solution is just to get a wireless kit. We always recommend the SVS one because it works.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two options. There's the tri-band and the regular one. The regular one just has, the tri-band is for extreme ranges and difficult situations.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're almost certainly going to be tucking this receiver into someplace it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And probably
I'm
putting
kind
a
of
door
tempted
in
to
front
say
of it.
just spend a bit extra and get the SoundPath tri-band.
I am too.
Wireless adapter. Yeah.
You're probably going to put a piano on top of the the subwoofer. So yeah, just get the tri-band one. That way you'll have the maximum possible options for where to put the subwoofer and everything else. So yeah, that's what I would do.
Yep. Agreed. And then, whatever subwoofer works for you. Probably the largest sealed sub that SVS makes that you would be willing to spend the money on and put in here so that you'll have a subwoofer that won't break itself but will still be visually quite nice.
Get a PC4000 and throw a acoustically transparent fabric on top of it. Mitch asks, could we talk about some of those very specific overhead Atmos speaker angles that Dolby includes in their white papers for full-size cinemas and mixing and mastering studios versus the much more vague guidelines that are given in the white paper for Atmos at home? Last week, Rob seemed to be saying that we shouldn't be overly concerned about adhering to strict angles that are specified for studios and cinemas. And why is that? The distance for the cinema one for sure. The studios, I mean, the whole idea behind these very specific guidelines is because, especially in the mixing studio, you're trying to keep things uniform from place to place to place. You can't be vague.
Right.
Because
and in the mixing and mastering studio, there is one seat that they are worried about.
Right. And if you're vague about these things or you're kind of wishy-washy with where things can go, then you end up with people complaining that some mixes are better than others, and and then they're blaming the mixing on the mixing studios and everything else. At least if you are taking it out of the equation. We said to put it here. If you didn't put it there, then it's your fault for things sounding bad. And as far as cinemas go, too, you got to remember those angles first of all, they're covering a lot more people than you're worried about in your little home theater. And 1 degree difference in a cinema is many feet.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Right.
You're talking about a massive difference in placement versus, 1 or 2 degrees in your home theater is like, I don't know, a foot, maybe half a foot or something like that, because it's only 3, 4, 5 feet above you. So it's not as the degree difference may be larger, but or may seem to be larger, but as far as how far around the area that they want you to put the speaker, physically, the distance that the speaker might be is relatively the same. So there's a lot going on here.
Specific diagrams that people have been all worried about are the ones showing the elevation angles for the overhead speakers, and it's because for the mixing studio where there is the single listener that they were concerned about, they've very carefully specified that the floor level speakers, if it's perfectly at the exact same height as your ears, then they're going to call that 0 degrees of elevation for the floor level. But they're saying that you can, in your studio setup, have the floor level speakers elevated as much as a maximum of a 20-degree elevation angle. This would be like your surrounds and surround backs predominantly, but sometimes even the front speakers if they're positioned above your mastering monitor, that the floor level speakers might be elevated. So they're saying, take whatever the elevation is of your floor level speakers, which might be 0, it might be the exact same height as your ears, so it might be 0, and divide that elevation by 2 So if they're 10 degrees elevated, that's 5 degrees now. If it's 20 degrees elevated, that's 10 degrees now. And then add 45 degrees. And that's the elevation angle that your overhead Atmos speakers should be, your top fronts and your top rears. And then also going like from your sides, that it's half of the elevation of your floor level speakers from horizontal, and then add 45 degrees. This very specific number. Now, that said, right in the actual wording, it's saying, well, the minimum we would allow is actually a 30-degree elevation angle of the overhead speakers, added to whatever the elevation is of your floor level speakers, which might be 0. So that means that in the wording that's actually written below the diagram, and everybody's looking at the diagram and going, the numbers are right there in the diagram, but the wording in Dolby's own white paper says might be 30 degrees. The elevation angle of your Atmos speakers might be 30 degrees. That's the minimum that we say is 30 degrees, which is the same as Oro, which is the same as DTS, but it might be 30 degrees, up to a maximum of 55 degrees plus half of the elevation angle of your floor level speakers. So that could be 65 degrees. It's getting, not very far to your left and right. But that's, everybody's up in arms about those because it's right there in the diagram. It's got to be exactly 45 degrees plus half of the elevation of your, floor level speakers. And then there are some sort of similar angles, this adding 45 degrees when it's in the full size cinema. And there's a whole thing about exactly where the overhead speakers are supposed to be aimed and angled in the full size cinema. It's ever so important. So as you can tell from the tone in my voice, the reason I don't think you have to worry so much about sticking strictly to these angles that are mentioned at home is because A, we need to live in the real world. Sometimes you just can't physically put your speakers there, and you're going to drive yourself crazy if you think you have to rebuild your whole room to follow in exactly those. A prime, keep in mind that they gave you a range even for the professional studio that includes 30 degrees being sufficient. It's not in the diagram, but it's right there in the words. But then more than all of that, we've alluded to this, in the full-size cinema, those speakers are way above you, right? You got lots of height in the full-size cinema. So those speakers are way above you. So when you talk about what is the angle of dispersion of the speaker, even if the dispersion of those overhead speakers is not super wide, just by virtue of them being so much higher than the audience, that dispersion is covering a whole bunch of seats. And in the mixing studio, they only care about one seat. So where this doesn't make sense to me at home to worry about it is, let's say you've elevated your surround speakers a little bit. Let's say you've elevated them the maximum that's in this thing of 20 degrees. So you're going to take 10 degrees, and then you're going to add that 10 degrees to 45. So 55-degree angle. So you might have a 55-degree elevation angle for where you think determining the left and right spread of your overhead speakers should be at home. That might be narrower than your 3-seat couch, right? If your room is not very tall, right, 7.5 feet or something like that, you're going to end up with your top front left speaker being to the right of the person who's sitting in the leftmost seat of the couch. And that does not make sense. The left speaker should be to the left of the audience. The right speaker should be to the right of the audience. I know that you're going to look at the full-size cinema and go, well, for some of those seats, the seats over on the side of the cinema, that's not true. But that's what we're saying. Those are the compromised seats. We're looking at the primary area, which is still many seats in a theater because the ceiling is so tall, where the left overhead speakers to the left of that portion of the audience, the right overhead speakers are to the right of that portion of the audience. To me, that's what we need to worry about. That means that the top left front speaker and the top left rear speaker, I'm going to have them like over the armrest of my leftmost seat on my 3-seater couch. And I'm not going to move them closer together than that because that's the only way I can get to the 45 plus 10 angle that I'm supposed to have because I elevated my surround speakers. I'm not going to worry about that angle. And frankly, the document already said if it's 30 degrees, you're within spec. So that's why I don't think I'm so worried about the angles.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm still scrolling through all these pictures.
Yes.
How much time do we have left here? We're over.
Not really any.
All right, then. What do we got left?
Okay, where were we? We're on to Ryan is on the list for next week. Oh, that's too bad. I kind of wanted to get to that one. But anyway, we'll do that. There was somebody who wrote in, and the only sort of name buried within the name of their email was Sherry, and I don't know if that is who wrote to us, but their email was not signed. So if that was you, and you said you were kind of a relatively new listener, and you were asking about the labels for overhead speakers in your AV receiver, let me know your name, or I'll try to reply back to you on email. But yeah, that question is in there. And Stan, that is, and Reginald too. There we go. Wow, we all got up to 16 this week. So those are on the list for next week.
All right. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Herb for going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 138 patrons over at patreon.com.
That is for sure. Thank you very much, Herb, for that PayPal donation. Really do appreciate that. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 138 patrons over there.
I thank Nathan for sending you a movie code, as well as our notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Greg, Julian, JT, Bret, Ryan, Eric, Herb, Gurinder, and Gurinder.
That is it. Yeah, thanks very much, Nathan, again for A Clockwork Orange on Google Play, building my little library over there. And Greg, Julian, JT, Bret, Ryan, Eric, Herb, and Gurinder, thank you all very much for sending in those notes of gratitude to us for keeping the podcast going. It is here in some form or fashion, so thank you very much to everyone for continuing to listen and sending in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.